The fluorescent lights of Terminal C hummed overhead like mechanical bees, casting their sterile glow across the polished floors. It was 6:47 a.m. at Denver International Airport, and the early morning crowd moved in tired waves, businessmen clutching coffee cups, families herding sleepy children, solo travelers lost in their phones. At security checkpoint 12, the conveyor belts churned steadily, swallowing bags and spitting them out under the watchful eyes of TSA officers. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, shoe rubber, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety that always lingered in airports. Among the shuffling passengers stood a woman in her late 50s, her skin the color of warm mahogany, her hair pulled back in a simple gray bun. Her name was Dorothy Hayes, and she wore a worn navy cardigan over a floral dress that had seen many washings but still held its dignity. In her hands, she clutched a small canvas bag and a boarding pass to Phoenix, a city she hadn't seen in 12 years. She was going to see her daughter. Dorothy placed her bag gently on the conveyor belt, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were handling something precious. She stepped through the metal detector when signaled, her shoes clicking softly against the cold floor. The machine didn't beep. But Officer Marcus Reed, standing at the end of the checkpoint with his arms crossed and his jaw set, watched her with eyes that had already decided something. He was 34, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming, his authority absolute in this small kingdom of gates and rules. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice flat, "step aside, please." Dorothy turned, confusion flickering across her gentle features. "Is something wrong, sir?" "Random inspection, step over here." Around them, other passengers glanced over briefly before returning to their own journeys, already trained to look away from other people's troubles. The morning announcements droned on. Flight 237 to Atlanta now boarding at Gate B15. Dorothy moved to the side as instructed, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. She had done nothing wrong. She knew this. But knowing and feeling are different things, and in that moment, under the harsh airport lights and the cold gaze of authority, she felt very small. Officer Reed pulled on blue latex gloves with 3 sharp snaps. "I'm going to need to search your bag," he said. "Of course," Dorothy replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know it yet, but her morning was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. And in the fluorescent cathedral of Terminal C, a small moment was about to become a very big test of character, of dignity, and of what happens when power meets grace. Dorothy had woken that morning at 3:30 a.m. in her small apartment in North Denver, a one-bedroom place above a laundromat where the walls hummed with the rhythm of washers and dryers even at night. She'd packed her bag the night before, just the essentials. 2 changes of clothes, her Bible with the cracked leather cover, a small framed photo of her daughter, Keisha, and her granddaughter, Maya, both smiling in front of a cactus somewhere in the Arizona desert. She hadn't seen them in person since Maya was 3. Now the girl was 15. 12 years. 12 years of phone calls and birthday cards and promises that next time would come soon. But Dorothy cleaned houses 6 days a week, and the money was always too tight, the distance too far, the world too big for a woman with worn hands and an empty bank account. But this time was different. Keisha had sent her the ticket, a surprise. "Mama, it's time," her daughter had said over the phone, her voice breaking. "I need you here. Maya needs you here. We miss you." Dorothy had cried for an hour after that call. So this morning she dressed carefully, said a prayer in her tiny kitchen, and taken 2 buses to reach the airport. She'd never flown before. The whole experience felt like stepping into another dimension. The crowds, the noise, the smell of cinnamon and jet fuel mixing in the air. Now, standing under Officer Reed's scrutiny, she tried to steady her breathing. He unzipped her canvas bag roughly, his gloved hands pulling out her folded dresses, her worn sneakers, her toiletries in a clear plastic bag. He examined each item with suspicion, as if expecting to find contraband hidden in the folds of her Sunday cardigan. "Where are you traveling to?" he asked without looking at her. "Phoenix to see my daughter." His tone suggested he didn't believe her or didn't care. He pulled out the small wooden box she'd packed, a jewelry box old and scratched with a tiny brass latch. "What's this?" "Just keepsakes, sir, personal things." He opened it anyway. Inside were simple things: a pair of small silver earrings, a locket with a faded photo, a folded letter yellow with age. Officer Reed stared at the contents for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Dorothy, his eyes hard. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me to secondary screening." Dorothy's stomach dropped. I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" "Secondary screening," he repeated, louder this time as if volume would make it clearer. "Now." Around them, other passengers were beginning to notice. A woman in yoga pants whispered to her husband. A businessman looked over the top of his newspaper. Dorothy felt the heat of shame creep up her neck, though she'd done nothing to earn it. "Sir, my flight leaves in 40 minutes. "Then you'd better cooperate quickly." His words were a wall, cold, final. Dorothy nodded slowly, gathering what remained of her dignity around her like a shawl. She picked up her bag with trembling hands and followed Officer Reed toward a small room at the far end of the security area, a room with frosted glass and a door that closed with a heavy, echoing click. And as that door shut behind her, sealing her away from the bright, busy world of travelers and destinations, Dorothy Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to face something far more difficult than a simple security check. Something was waiting for her in that room. Something that would test every ounce of grace she had left. The secondary screening room was small and windowless, lit by the same harsh fluorescent bulbs that seemed to exist in every corner of the airport. A metal table sat in the center, bolted to the floor. 2 plastic chairs. A camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking steadily like a mechanical heartbeat. Dorothy stood near the table, her bag placed in front of her, her hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. Officer Reed closed the door and positioned himself between Dorothy and the exit. Another officer entered, a younger woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her nameplate reading Officer Barnes. "What's the situation?" Barnes asked, her voice clipped and professional. "Suspicious behavior at checkpoint," Reed said, gesturing toward Dorothy as if she weren't standing right there. "Nervous demeanor, evasive answers, outdated identification." Dorothy's heart hammered. "Sir, I wasn't being evasive. I told you exactly where I'm going." "Ma'am, let me handle this," Reed cut her off. He turned to Barnes. "Run a full background check. I want to know everything." Barnes nodded and stepped outside with Dorothy's ID. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dorothy could hear her own breathing, the distant hum of the airport beyond the walls, the faint crackle of Reed's radio. Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. Reed leaned against the table, arms crossed. "That depends on what we find." "But I haven't done anything wrong." "Everyone says that." His words landed like stones. Dorothy felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not here, not in front of this man who had already decided she was guilty of something she couldn't name. Minutes passed, 5, 10, each one stretched like hours. Finally, Officer Barnes returned, holding a tablet. She whispered something to Reed, and Dorothy watched his expression shift, not softer but different, calculating. He looked at Dorothy for a long moment, then straightened. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, and the use of her name felt almost mocking. "We've completed your background check. You're clear. No warrants, no flags." Dorothy exhaled, relief flooding through her. Then Then I can go, I can catch my flight. Not exactly. The relief evaporated. Reed picked up her wooden jewelry box from the table, turning it over in his hands. This box, you said it contains keepsakes. Yes, sir. Personal items of value. They're valuable to me, but they're not. The problem, Reed interrupted, is that you failed to declare these items properly during screening. Jewelry, even costume jewelry, must be declared if it exceeds a certain cumulative value for insurance and customs purposes. Dorothy stared at him, confusion written across her face. But I'm flying domestically, to Phoenix. There's no customs. TSA regulations require full disclosure of all valuable items to ensure passenger safety and compliance, Reed continued, his voice taking on the mechanical quality of someone reciting a script. Failure to properly declare items constitutes a security violation under Federal Aviation Code 108.9, subsection 12. He set the box down with a deliberate thud. The fine for this violation is $7,500. The room seemed to tilt. Dorothy gripped the edge of the table. 7,000. That's correct. Payable immediately, or you'll be barred from boarding and subject to additional penalties. Dorothy's legs felt weak. $7,000. She had exactly $237 in her checking account. Her entire life savings was $4,000, kept in a coffee can in her kitchen cabinet for emergencies. Sir, I can't. I don't have that kind of money. These are just old earrings, a locket. They're not worth anything to anyone but me. The value is irrelevant. The violation is the failure to declare. Officer Barnes shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Reed and Dorothy. Dorothy's voice cracked. Please, I'm just trying to see my daughter. I haven't seen her in 12 years. My granddaughter. Her throat closed around the words. Reed's expression didn't change. You can pay the fine or you can leave the airport. Those are your options. In that cold, sterile room, with the camera's red light blinking indifferently and the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders, Dorothy Hayes felt something inside her break. Just a little, just enough to let the fear in. But beneath that fear, deeper down, something else stirred. Something quiet and strong and unshakable. Something that remembered who she was. Dorothy stood frozen, her mind racing through calculations that had no solution. $7,500. The number kept repeating in her head like a cruel mantra. She thought of her daughter's voice on the phone. Mama, it's time. We need you here. She thought of Maya, 15 now, a young woman she'd only seen through photographs and pixelated video calls. Can I make a phone call? Dorothy asked, her voice barely steady. Reed shrugged. You can call whoever you want. It won't change the situation. Dorothy pulled her old flip phone from her cardigan pocket with trembling fingers. She stepped to the corner of the room, turning slightly away, and dialed Keisha's number. Her daughter answered on the second ring, her voice bright with anticipation. Mama, are you on the plane yet? Dorothy closed her eyes. Baby, there's a problem. The brightness drained from Keisha's voice. What kind of problem? They're saying I have to pay a fine. $7,000. They say I didn't declare my jewelry box properly. Silence, then $7,000. Mama, that's insane. For what? Your old earrings. That doesn't make any sense. I know, baby, I know. Let me talk to them. Put someone on the phone. Keisha, Dorothy's voice was gentle but firm. It won't help. They've already decided. She could hear her daughter's breath catching, the sound of tears being fought back. Mama, I'm so sorry. I should have driven up to get you. I should have. Don't you apologize for anything. You gave me a gift. This isn't your fault. Through the phone, Dorothy heard another voice, younger, uncertain. Grandma, is that Grandma? Maya, the girl she'd held as a baby, who probably wouldn't even recognize her now. Dorothy's resolve cracked just a little more. "Tell her I love her," she whispered. "Tell her I tried." "Mama, no, don't give up, we'll figure something out. We'll get a lawyer, we'll call someone. The flight leaves in 20 minutes, baby." The finality of those words hung in the air. Dorothy ended the call before she could break completely. She stood there for a moment, her back to the officers, her eyes fixed on the gray wall. She thought about her small apartment above the laundromat. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's house, where she'd scrubbed floors just yesterday. She thought about the 12 years that had passed and the moment that was slipping through her fingers like water. When she turned back around, her face was composed, tear-stained but composed. Officer Reed was watching her with something that might have been impatience or might have been satisfaction. She couldn't tell anymore. "I can't pay the fine," Dorothy said quietly. "I don't have that money. I don't have anything close to that." "Then you'll need to surrender the items in question and forfeit your flight." "But the items aren't worth." "Ma'am, I've explained the regulations. This is non-negotiable." Officer Barnes spoke up for the first time since returning with the background check. "Reed, maybe we could." "Could what?" Reed turned to her, his voice sharp. "Ignore federal regulations. Let passengers decide which rules apply to them." Barnes fell silent, but Dorothy saw something in the younger woman's eyes. Doubt, discomfort, maybe even shame. Dorothy looked down at her jewelry box, at the simple treasures inside it. The earrings her mother had given her before she passed. The locket with her wedding photo. She'd been 22, her husband James 24, both of them so young and so certain that love could conquer anything. He died 6 years later. Heart attack. Gone in an instant. The letter was from Keisha, written when she was 10 years old, telling Dorothy she was the best mama in the world. These things weren't valuable to anyone but her, but to her, they were everything. "If I give you the box," Dorothy said slowly, "can I at least keep the letter? It's just paper. It's not worth anything." Reed considered this. "Fine, take the letter, but the box and its contents stay here." Dorothy's hands shook as she opened the jewelry box one last time. She carefully unfolded the yellowed letter, read her daughter's childhood handwriting, "Dear Mama, I love you more than all the stars," and pressed it against her chest. Then she closed the box and pushed it across the table toward Reed. "There," she said softly, "you can have it." Reed picked up the box without ceremony and handed it to Barnes. "Log this as confiscated property. Mrs. Hayes, you're free to leave the airport." Free, the word was a mockery. Dorothy gathered her empty bag, her footsteps heavy as she moved toward the door. But as her hand touched the handle, she paused. She turned back to face Officer Reed, and when she spoke, her voice was different. Still gentle, but filled with something deeper. "Sir, I don't know what happened in your life to make you this way, but I want you to know something. I forgive you." Reed's face hardened. "I don't need your forgiveness. I'm doing my job." "Maybe so," Dorothy said, "but I forgive you anyway." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving behind more than just a jewelry box. She left behind the question of what kind of man Marcus Reed wanted to be. Dorothy emerged from the secondary screening room into the bright chaos of the terminal. The crowds had grown thicker, families rushing toward gates, business people speed-walking with rolling suitcases, the automated announcements blending into white noise. She stood there for a moment, disoriented, clutching her empty canvas bag and the folded letter. The gate where her plane waited was visible in the distance, down a long corridor lined with shops and restaurants. Gate C-27. Through the windows, she could see the aircraft, sleek and white against the morning sky. It might as well have been on another planet. Dorothy's phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. "Mama, please don't give up. Maya's crying, we love you." The words blurred as tears finally came, silent and hot. Dorothy wiped them away quickly and found a bench near a coffee shop. She sat down heavily, feeling every one of her 58 years in her bones. She didn't notice the young man who had been standing near the security checkpoint, watching the entire scene unfold. His name was David Chen. No, wait. His name was David Torres, and he was 26 years old, a freelance journalist who'd been traveling through Denver on his way to a conference in Seattle. He'd been in line behind Dorothy at security, had watched Officer Reed single her out, had seen the way she carried herself with such dignity even as she was being led away. Something about it had bothered him, something felt wrong. So David had waited, and when Dorothy emerged from that room, her face marked by tears but her shoulders still straight, he'd made a decision. He approached her carefully, like someone approaching a wounded bird. "Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am." Dorothy looked up startled. "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was in line behind you at security. I saw what happened." He hesitated. "Are you okay?" Dorothy tried to smile. "I'm fine, son, just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding that cost you $7,000. She looked at him sharply. "You heard that?" "I was standing close enough, and I know a little bit about TSA regulations. I used to work airport security in college." David sat down on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Ma'am, what that officer told you about declaring jewelry for domestic flights, that's not a real regulation, at least not the way he described it." Dorothy's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean he was lying to you, or at best, severely misrepresenting policy. You don't have to declare personal jewelry on domestic flights. There's no $7,000 fine. None of what he said makes sense." The words hung in the air between them. Dorothy felt something cold settle in her stomach. But he's a federal officer. Why would he?" "I don't know," David said gently, "but it's not right and it's not legal." Back in the secondary screening room, Officer Barnes stood with her arms crossed, watching Reed log the confiscated jewelry box into the evidence system. "That was harsh," she said quietly. Reed didn't look up. "It was policy." "Was it? Because I've been doing this job for 3 years, and I've never heard of a $7,000 fine for undeclared costume jewelry on a domestic flight." Reed's jaw tightened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" "I'm questioning whether that woman deserved to miss her flight over a box of old earrings." "She was suspicious." "She was a grandmother trying to visit her family." Barnes' voice rose, then dropped again. "Reed, come on, you saw her ID. You ran her background. She's a 60-year-old cleaning lady with no record, no flags, nothing. What exactly were you suspicious of?" Reed slammed the tablet down on the table. "I make the calls at my checkpoint, Barnes, not you. If you have a problem with how I operate, take it up with the supervisor." "Maybe I will." The tension between them crackled like electricity. Reed's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. We have a situation developing at Checkpoint 12. Civilian is requesting to file a formal complaint and is refusing to leave the security area." Barnes and Reed exchanged glances. "That's our checkpoint," Barnes said. They exited the room quickly, moving back through the security corridor. When they arrived, they found a small crowd had gathered. At the center of it stood David Torres, his phone out, his voice calm but firm as he addressed another TSA supervisor, an older black woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, her badge reading Supervisor Patterson. And beside David, looking uncertain but present, was Dorothy Hayes. "I'm telling you," David was saying, "the fine he issued is not legitimate. I've researched TSA regulations, and there is no subsection 108.9 that applies to personal jewelry on domestic flights. This woman was coerced into surrendering her property under false pretenses." Supervisor Patterson's gaze moved from David to Dorothy, to the approaching figures of Reed and Barnes. "Officer Reed," she said, her voice carrying authority, "is this true? Did you issue a $7,000 fine to this passenger? Reed's face had gone pale, then red. I acted within my authority based on suspicious behavior and potential security violations. Did you or did you not tell this woman she owed $7,000? A long pause. The crowd had grown silent, all eyes on the officers. I may have overstated the regulatory language for emphasis. You lied to her. Patterson's voice was ice. You intimidated a passenger, confiscated her property, and caused her to miss her flight based on made-up regulations. The truth of it hung in the air, undeniable now, witnessed by dozens of people with their phones out, recording everything. Reed opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say. Supervisor Patterson turned to Dorothy, and her expression softened. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry. This should never have happened. We will return your property immediately, and I promise you there will be consequences for this behavior." Dorothy stood very still, processing everything. The lie, the humiliation, the stolen moment with her daughter. But when she spoke, her voice held no anger. Only a quiet, devastating question: why? She looked directly at Officer Reed. "Why did you do this to me?" And in that moment, with everyone watching, Marcus Reed had no answer at all. The crowd around Checkpoint 12 had grown larger, a mixture of curious travelers and those who had witnessed the confrontation from the beginning. Phones were still raised, recording every moment. The morning light streamed through the terminal windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Officer Reed stood silent, his face a mask of rigid defense, but his eyes betrayed him. Shame flickered there just for a second before he looked away. Supervisor Patterson spoke into her radio. "I need security management to Checkpoint 12 immediately. We have a situation that requires documentation and review." She turned back to Dorothy. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me, we'll retrieve your belongings and arrange for you to be placed on the next available flight to Phoenix at no additional cost. We'll also provide meal vouchers and a formal written apology." "Wait." Everyone turned to look at Dorothy. She stood there, this woman in her worn cardigan and simple dress, holding a letter from her daughter that was now crumpled from her tight grip. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were also clear, focused. "Before we do anything else," Dorothy said quietly, "I need to say something." Supervisor Patterson nodded. "Of course." Dorothy turned to face Officer Reed directly. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. "Officer Reed," she began, her voice steady despite everything, "what you did to me today was wrong. You know it was wrong. You used your authority to humiliate me and to take things that mattered to me. You made me believe I was a criminal when all I wanted was to see my family." Reed's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. "I lost my flight because of you," Dorothy continued. "I missed the moment when my daughter would meet me at the airport. I missed the moment when I'd see my granddaughter's face for the first time in 12 years. You took that from me." The words hung heavy in the air. "But," Dorothy said, and something in her voice shifted, softened, deepened, "I want you to know that I meant what I said in that room. I forgive you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reed's head snapped up, his eyes meeting Dorothy's with something like confusion. "I don't understand people who hurt others," Dorothy said. "I've never understood it, but I do understand pain. And I know that hurt people hurt people. I don't know what you're carrying, Officer Reed. I don't know what made you think it was okay to treat me, or anyone, the way you did. But I know that holding onto anger only makes the weight heavier." She took a step closer to him. "So I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, but because holding on to this anger won't bring back my mourning and it won't heal whatever's broken inside you. Only you can do that." Tears were streaming down Dorothy's face now, but her voice never wavered. "I forgive you because that's what my mother taught me. That's what my faith tells me. And that's what the world needs more of, people who choose grace even when they've been shown none." Officer Reed's face crumbled. For just a moment the armor fell away and everyone could see the man underneath, broken, ashamed, human. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry." It was barely a whisper, but in the silence of that crowd it carried. Dorothy nodded slowly. "I know you are, and I hope you remember this feeling the next time you put on that uniform. I hope you remember that the people you stop, they're all somebody's mother, somebody's child. They all matter." She wiped her eyes and turned to Supervisor Patterson. "Now, if it's all the same to you, I'd like my jewelry box back. And I'd like to know when I can get to Phoenix because my daughter and granddaughter are waiting." Patterson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Right away, ma'am, right away." As the supervisor moved to retrieve Dorothy's belongings, David Torres approached quietly. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "what you just did, that took more courage than most people have." Dorothy looked at him, this young stranger who had stood up for her when he didn't have to. "Thank you, son," she said softly. "Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in this world." "You reminded me of that," David replied, "not the other way around." Officer Barnes approached tentatively, her face etched with remorse. "Ma'am, I should have said something earlier. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry." Dorothy reached out and gently touched the young woman's arm. "You spoke up when it mattered. That's what counts. Don't let fear keep you silent next time, okay?" Barnes nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some people approaching Dorothy to offer words of support, others simply nodding in respect as they passed. An older gentleman pressed a $20 bill into her hand for coffee, refusing to take it back. A young mother with a baby on her hip simply said, "God bless you." And through it all, Dorothy Hayes stood with quiet dignity, a woman who had been knocked down but refused to stay fallen, who had been shown cruelty but chose to respond with grace. Officer Reed watched from a distance, his world fundamentally changed by the mercy of a woman he'd tried to diminish. And somewhere in Phoenix, a phone rang with news that would turn tears of disappointment into tears of joy. The secondary screening room felt different now. Emptier, somehow, even though it was the same small space with the same metal table and the same blinking camera. Officer Marcus Reed stood alone inside it, the door closed behind him at his own request. In his hands, he held Dorothy Hayes's wooden jewelry box. Supervisor Patterson had retrieved it from evidence, and before returning it to Dorothy, she'd handed it to Reed. "I think you need to see what you almost kept from her," Patterson had said, her voice quiet but firm. "Really see it." Now Reed opened the box slowly. Inside, a pair of small silver earrings, tarnished with age, a locket on a delicate chain, and beneath them the impression in the velvet lining where the letter had rested. Reed picked up the locket with careful fingers and opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded and creased, a young woman and a young man on their wedding day, both of them beaming with a joy so pure it hurt to look at. He recognized the woman as Dorothy, decades younger, her face unlined and full of hope. He'd taken this from her. He'd held this hostage over fabricated rules and made-up fines. Why? The question Dorothy had asked him echoed in his mind. Why did you do this to me? Reed sank into one of the plastic chairs, the jewelry box still in his hands. The truth was complicated and simple and devastating. He'd been doing this job for 8 years. 8 years of early mornings and late nights, of suspicious passengers and real threats mixed with 1,000 false alarms. 8 years of being yelled at, disrespected, ignored. 8 years of trying to keep people safe while they complained about taking off their shoes. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing people as people. They'd become potential problems, possible threats, inconveniences to be processed and moved along. And somewhere even deeper, in a place he didn't like to examine, he'd started to resent them. Resent their ease, their destinations, their freedom to complain about inconveniences while he stood in the same spot day after day, wielding the only power he had, the power to stop them, to delay them, to make them feel as small as he sometimes felt. When he'd seen Dorothy Hayes this morning, this quiet, older black woman traveling alone with her worn bag and her nervous energy, something in him had made a decision. She was an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back, wouldn't cause a scene, wouldn't know the regulations well enough to challenge him. Someone he could control. The realization of it made him sick. He'd become the kind of officer he'd promised himself he'd never be, the kind who abused authority because he could, the kind who forgot that every person passing through his checkpoint had a story, a destination, people who loved them. Reed thought about his own mother, who had died 3 years ago. He thought about how she used to travel to visit his sister in Boston, how she'd been nervous at airports, how she'd always packed too much and worried about doing something wrong. What if someone had treated her the way he'd treated Dorothy Hayes? The thought made his chest tighten with shame. There was a knock on the door. Reed quickly wiped his eyes and cleared his throat. "Come in." Supervisor Patterson entered, her expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed. "I've been supervising this checkpoint for 12 years, Reed. I've seen a lot of officers come and go, some good, some not so good." She paused. "I thought you were one of the good ones." Reed couldn't meet her eyes. "I thought so too. What happened out there, that can't happen again, ever. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm recommending a full investigation. You'll be suspended pending review. There will likely be retraining required at minimum, at worst." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Reed nodded. "I understand. I deserve whatever comes." Patterson studied him for a long moment. "That woman could have destroyed you out there. She could have demanded your badge, pressed charges, made this into a national story. Do you know why she didn't?" Reed shook his head. "Because she's a better person than most people would be in her situation. She chose mercy when she had every right to choose justice." Patterson's voice softened slightly. "Don't waste that gift, Reed. Don't let her grace be for nothing." After Patterson left, Reed sat alone with his thoughts for several more minutes. Then he stood, tucked the jewelry box carefully under his arm, and walked back out into the terminal. He found Dorothy sitting in a chair near gate C-27, a new boarding pass in her hand. David Torres sat nearby, having apparently decided to wait with her until her flight was called. They were talking quietly, Dorothy showing him the photograph of her daughter and granddaughter. Reed approached slowly, hesitantly. Dorothy looked up as his shadow fell across her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Reed held out the jewelry box. "Your belongings, ma'am. Everything is here, I checked." Dorothy took the box gently, opened it, and her face softened at the sight of the earrings and locket safely inside. "Thank you," she said quietly. Reed cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to know. What I did today, there's no excuse for it. I abused my authority. I targeted you. I lied to you. And I'm sorrier than I know how to say." Dorothy looked up at him, waiting. "I'm going to be suspended," Reed continued. "Maybe fired, I don't know yet, but either way I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Not to you, not to anyone." He paused, struggling with the words. "You showed me something today. You showed me the kind of person I should be, the kind of person I want to be." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, set the jewelry box on her chair, and did something that shocked everyone watching. She stepped forward and embraced Officer Marcus Reed. It was brief, just a few seconds, but in that moment everything changed. Reed stood frozen at first, then his shoulders shook, and those nearby could see tears streaming down his face. "It's going to be okay," Dorothy whispered. "You're going to be okay. Just remember this feeling. Remember what it means to be human." When she stepped back, Reed couldn't speak. He simply nodded, wiped his face, and walked away, not with the rigid authority he'd carried that morning, but with the humble, uncertain steps of someone who had just been shown a mirror and didn't like what he'd seen, but who was willing, finally, to change. David Torres watched the exchange with quiet amazement. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "I've covered a lot of stories in my career, but I've never seen anything like what you just did." Dorothy settled back into her chair, holding her jewelry box close. "My mother used to say that everybody's fighting a battle you can't see. That doesn't excuse cruelty, but it does explain it. That man, he's lost, but maybe now he has a chance to find his way back." "You're remarkable," David said. Dorothy smiled, a real smile this time. "No, son, I'm just tired of anger, tired of hate, tired of people hurting each other when there's already so much pain in the world." She looked down at her locket, running her thumb over its worn surface. "Life's too short to carry that weight. I learned that when I lost my husband. I learned it again when 12 years passed without seeing my baby girl. Time is precious. Forgiveness is freedom." The overhead speaker crackled to life. "Now boarding Flight 1847 to Phoenix. Zone 1 passengers may begin boarding at Gate C-27. Dorothy's face lit up like sunrise. "That's me. That's my flight." David helped her gather her things. "Go see your family, Mrs. Hayes. They're lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Dorothy replied. As she walked toward the gate, boarding pass in hand and jewelry box safely tucked in her bag, several people in the waiting area began to clap. It started with one person, then spread. A spontaneous ovation for a woman who had shown them all what grace looked like in the face of injustice. Dorothy paused, overwhelmed, then simply waved and smiled before continuing to the gate agent. The agent, a young man with kind eyes, scanned her boarding pass and looked up at her. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been asked to inform you that you've been upgraded to first class, courtesy of the airline, and there's a meal voucher packet here with our deepest apologies for your experience today." Dorothy's eyes widened. "First class? Oh my, I've never." "Enjoy your flight, ma'am. You deserve it." As Dorothy walked down the jetway, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just relief, not just anticipation, but hope. Hope that the world, despite all its brokenness, still had room for mercy, still had space for second chances, still believed that one person's kindness could ripple outward and touch lives in ways that would never fully be known. Behind her in the terminal, Officer Marcus Reed sat alone in a corner, his career uncertain, his future unclear, but his heart cracked open in a way it hadn't been in years. And in Phoenix, a daughter and granddaughter waited at an airport terminal, holding a welcome sign and counting down the minutes until they could wrap their arms around the woman who had taught them everything about strength, dignity, and love. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Dorothy Hayes looked out the window at the vast blue sky and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for forgiveness, for the journey home. 3 hours later, Flight 1847 touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The landing was smooth, the Arizona sun blazing hot even through the airplane windows. Dorothy sat in her first-class seat, the wide leather chair still feeling surreal, and watched the desert landscape roll past as the plane taxied to the gate. Her heart was pounding. Around her, passengers gathered their belongings, pulled bags from overhead compartments, checked their phones. The usual controlled chaos of disembarking. But Dorothy sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her jewelry box resting on top of her canvas bag. 12 years. The number felt both impossibly long and strangely short. How could 12 years pass? How could a baby become a teenager? How could so much time disappear while you were just trying to survive, trying to pay rent, trying to keep your head above water? "Ma'am," the flight attendant, a woman named Patricia with gentle eyes, touched Dorothy's shoulder softly. "We've arrived. You can head out now." Dorothy looked up and realized the cabin had nearly emptied. Oh, oh my, I was just. Take your time, Patricia said with a knowing smile. Someone special waiting for you. My daughter, my granddaughter. Then you'd better not keep them waiting another second. Dorothy stood on shaking legs, gathered her things, and made her way up the aisle. As she stepped into the jetway, the heat hit her immediately. That dry, intense Arizona heat that felt like stepping into an oven. She moved with the flow of passengers through the terminal, following the signs toward baggage claim. Her hands trembled. What would she say? What would Keisha look like now? Would Maya recognize her? Would there be awkwardness, distance, 12 years of gap that couldn't be bridged? And then she turned a corner, and all her questions evaporated. There, in the arrivals area, stood a woman in her 30s with Dorothy's eyes and her father's smile, holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome Home, Mama," in bright rainbow letters. Beside her stood a teenage girl, tall, beautiful, with braids and bright, curious eyes, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Keisha. Maya. For a heartbeat, Dorothy couldn't move. She just stood there, drinking in the sight of them, these two precious souls who had lived entire lives while she'd been away. Then Keisha saw her. Mama. The sign fell to the ground. Keisha ran, actually ran, across the terminal floor, and Dorothy dropped her bag and opened her arms just in time to catch her daughter's embrace. They collided with the force of 12 years of longing, 12 years of phone calls and missed birthdays and "I love yous" said through screens instead of face to face. Both of them were sobbing. "You're here," Keisha kept saying, her face buried in her mother's shoulder. "You're really here. I thought when you called this morning, I thought I'd lost you again." "I'm here, baby, I'm here." Maya approached more slowly, uncertain, the sunflowers clutched in her hands. Up close, Dorothy could see so much of herself in the girl's face, the shape of her nose, the curve of her smile, the way she stood with one hip cocked just like Dorothy had done at that age. "Hi, Grandma," Maya said shyly. Dorothy pulled back from Keisha, tears streaming down her face, and opened one arm toward Maya. "Come here, sweet girl. Come here and let me look at you." Maya stepped into the embrace, and suddenly they were all three holding each other, crying and laughing and not caring who was watching or what anyone thought. "I'm so sorry," Dorothy whispered. "I'm so sorry I missed so much." "You're here now," Keisha said fiercely. "That's what matters, you're here now." They stood like that for a long time, a small island of reunion in the busy airport, until finally they pulled apart, wiping eyes and laughing at how they must look. Maya held out the sunflowers. "These are for you. Mom said they're your favorite." "They are," Dorothy said, taking them with trembling hands. "They're perfect, you're perfect." "Mom told me what happened this morning," Maya said, her young face serious. "About that security officer. That was messed up, Grandma. Are you okay?" Dorothy thought about the question. Was she okay? She thought about Officer Reed's face when he'd apologized, about the weight of anger she'd chosen not to carry, about the moment she decided that forgiveness was more important than vindication. "I am okay," she said slowly, "because I'm here with you, because some things are worth fighting through, and because I got to learn something important today." "What's that?" Keisha asked. "That grace is stronger than power, that mercy matters more than being right, that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to find our way home." Keisha squeezed her mother's hand. "You always did know how to find the lesson in everything." "Your grandmother's wisdom used to drive me crazy when I was younger," she said to Maya with a soft laugh. "But now I understand it." They gathered Dorothy's fallen bag and began walking toward the exit, arms linked, 3 generations moving as one unit. As they stepped out into the brilliant Arizona sunshine, the heat wrapping around them like a blanket, Maya asked, "Grandma, will you tell me about Grandpa? Mom says you have stories about him that she was too young to remember." Dorothy looked at her granddaughter, at this young woman who carried her husband's name as her middle name, Maya James Henderson, and felt her heart swell. I have so many stories, baby, so many stories, and we have time now. We have all the time in the world. In the car on the way to Keisha's house, Dorothy sat in the back seat with Maya, holding her granddaughter's hand and watching the desert landscape roll past, the cacti standing like sentinels, the mountains purple in the distance, the endless blue sky. Keisha glanced at her mother in the rearview mirror. "Mama, I know this morning was awful, but I'm so proud of you. Maya showed me the video. Someone posted it online. It's already got like 1 million views. People are calling you a hero." Dorothy shook her head. "I'm not a hero, baby. I'm just a woman who got tired of carrying hate." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Maya said quietly. They drove through Phoenix streets, past schools and shops and neighborhoods, each mile bringing them closer to home. Keisha's home. A place Dorothy would finally get to see, get to be part of, get to belong to. As they pulled into the driveway of a modest house with a cheerful blue door and desert plants in the front yard, Dorothy felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. She was home, not just at a physical address, but home in the way that mattered, surrounded by love, held by family, seen and known and cherished. The jewelry box in her bag held precious memories of the past. But sitting beside her, holding her hand, was the present. And standing on the porch, waving them inside with a bright smile, was the future. Dorothy Hayes had survived the morning. She had survived 12 years. She had survived heartbreak and loss and the cruelty of a man who forgot his own humanity. And she had done more than survive. She had forgiven. And in forgiving, she had freed herself to finally, truly come home. That evening, as the desert sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Dorothy sat on Keisha's back patio with a cup of tea in her hands. The temperature had dropped to something almost comfortable, and the backyard was filled with the sound of cicadas singing their twilight songs. Inside, through the sliding glass door, she could see Maya doing homework at the kitchen table while Keisha prepared dinner. Every few minutes, one of them would look out at Dorothy and smile, as if checking to make sure she was still there, still real, still not just a dream. Dorothy had unpacked her small bag in the guest room, her room, Keisha had insisted, for as long as she wanted to stay. On the dresser, she'd placed the wooden jewelry box, open so she could see the earrings and locket inside. Beside it, the letter from young Keisha, now carefully smoothed and placed in a frame Maya had brought her. "So you can see it every day," Maya had said. "So you remember that you've always been loved." Dorothy sipped her tea and thought about the day, about Officer Reed and his tears, about David Torres and his kindness, about Supervisor Patterson and her swift justice, about the crowd that had witnessed everything and chosen to stand with her instead of looking away. She thought about the video Keisha had shown her, shaky phone footage of Dorothy's speech to Officer Reed, her words about forgiveness, her embrace of a man who had wronged her. The comments were overwhelming. Thousands of people saying she'd inspired them, changed them, reminded them of what really mattered. But Dorothy didn't feel like an inspiration. She just felt tired and grateful and aware of how fragile everything was, how quickly a day could go wrong, and how much courage it took to choose grace over anger. The sliding door opened, and Keisha stepped out, joining her mother on the patio. She sat in the chair beside Dorothy and was quiet for a moment, just breathing in the evening air. "Mama," she finally said, "what you did today, I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have forgiven him." Dorothy turned to look at her daughter. "You could. You're stronger than you know." "Where does it come from, that kind of forgiveness?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "From understanding that we're all broken, I suppose. That officer, Marcus, his name was, he made a terrible choice today. He abused his power and hurt me. But somewhere in his life, something broke inside him too. Something made him forget that other people matter. and holding on to anger about that wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have just meant we were both broken. She set down her tea and folded her hands in her lap. Your grandmother, my mama, used to say that forgiveness isn't about pretending something didn't hurt. It's about refusing to let that hurt define you. It's about choosing freedom over chains. Dorothy's voice grew softer. I've lost too much already, baby. I lost your father far too soon. I lost 12 years with you and Maya. I wasn't going to lose my peace too. That was the one thing I could still control, whether I carried that man's cruelty with me or set it down and walked away. Keisha reached over and took her mother's hand. You're the strongest person I know. No, baby. I'm just a woman who got tired of being angry at a world that won't change on my timeline. I had to find a different way to live in it. Through the window, they watched Maya close her textbook and stretch, then look out at them and wave. Dorothy waved back, her heart full. You know what I realized today, Dorothy said. That officer, he thought he had all the power. He had the uniform, the badge, the rules. He could stop me, search me, find me, take my things. But you know what he couldn't take? What? My dignity, my grace, my ability to choose how I responded to him. That was mine. That's always ours, even when everything else is taken away. Keisha leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweet girl. They sat together as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, bright and infinite against the darkness. Inside, Maya called out that dinner was ready, and the two women stood, linked arms, and walked back into the warmth and light of home. 3 months later, Officer Marcus Reed sat in a community center in downtown Denver, facing a room of 25 teenagers in a youth mentorship program. He was no longer in uniform. He'd resigned from the TSA after his suspension, unable to continue in a job where he'd betrayed the public's trust. But Supervisor Patterson had helped him find this instead. A chance to speak to young people about integrity, about the abuse of power, about what happens when you forget that every person you encounter is someone's mother, father, child, friend. I was given authority, he told the teenagers, and I misused it. I targeted someone because I could, because I was angry at my own life and took it out on someone who didn't deserve it. He pulled up the video on his phone, the one that had gone viral, the one he watched every morning to remind himself of who he never wanted to be again. This woman, he said, showing Dorothy's face on the screen, she had every right to destroy me, to press charges, to demand I lose everything. But instead, she forgave me. She hugged me. She showed me that I could be better than my worst moment. One of the teenagers raised her hand. Did you ever talk to her again? Reed nodded. I wrote her a letter, a real letter, handwritten. It took me 26 tries to get it right. I apologized again and told her that I was getting help, therapy, anger management, working on understanding why I became that person. I told her I dedicated my life to making sure what I did to her never happens to anyone else. Did she write back? She did, 3 weeks later. She said she was proud of me for doing the work. She said healing isn't linear and forgiveness doesn't mean everything is fixed instantly. But she believed I could change. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Reed looked at the faces in front of him. Young, hopeful, uncertain faces still learning who they wanted to be in the world. Here's what I learned, he said. Power without compassion is just cruelty with a badge. Authority without empathy is just control. And if you're ever given any kind of power over another person, whether it's a uniform, a position, a privilege, use it to lift people up, not to push them down. The teenagers were silent, absorbing his words. The woman in that video taught me something I'll never forget. Kindness is stronger than anger. Forgiveness heals more than punishment. And grace, real grace, has the power to change everything. Back in Phoenix, Dorothy stood in Maya's high school auditorium, watching her granddaughter receive an award for a community service project she'd organized. a program connecting young people with elderly community members for companionship and support, inspired by the 12 years Dorothy and Maya had lost. As Maya gave her acceptance speech, Dorothy sat between Keisha and two of her new friends from the church they'd been attending together. She'd moved to Phoenix permanently 3 weeks after that first visit, unable to bear being apart from her family any longer. She'd found work cleaning houses here too, but now Keisha insisted on helping with rent, and Maya had started a small fundraiser to help her grandmother save for retirement. "My grandma taught me," Maya was saying from the stage, her voice clear and strong, "that time is the most precious thing we have. Not money, not things, but time with the people we love. And she taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing a person can do." Dorothy wiped tears from her eyes as the audience applauded. After the ceremony, as they drove home under the star-filled Arizona sky, Maya turned to Dorothy from the front seat. "Grandma, do you ever regret it? Forgiving that officer? People online still argue about whether you should have been angrier, whether you let him off too easy." Dorothy thought about the question. She thought about Marcus Reed's letter, which sat in her jewelry box now alongside her earrings and locket. She thought about the peace she'd found in choosing grace over grudges. "No, baby," she said finally. "I don't regret it, because anger would have poisoned me, not him. Holding on to hate would have stolen my joy, and I've already lost too much time to things I couldn't control. I wasn't going to lose one more day to bitterness." She reached forward and squeezed Maya's shoulder. "The world will always have people who choose cruelty, but it also has people who choose kindness. People like David who stood up for a stranger. People like Supervisor Patterson who believed in doing what's right. And people like you, sweet girl, who turned pain into purpose and loss into love." Maya covered her grandmother's hand with her own. "I want to be like you when I grow up." "No," Dorothy said gently. "Be better, be kinder, be braver. Stand up faster than I did. Speak louder than I could. But always, always choose love over hate. That's the only way this broken world ever gets better." They pulled into the driveway, and as they walked together into the house with the cheerful blue door, Dorothy sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For family found again. For the strength to forgive. And for the reminder that in a world that so often chooses power, there is nothing more powerful than grace. The lights in the house glowed warm against the desert night, and inside, 3 generations of women sat together, sharing a meal and stories and the kind of love that survives anything: distance, time, injustice, and pain. Because kindness is always stronger than anger. And forgiveness will always heal more than punishment. That is the truth Dorothy Hayes carried with her, not just that day at the airport, but every day after. A truth she lived. A truth she taught. A truth that changed more lives than she would ever know. The end.